Hello and welcome to today's session, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, What's the Fairest Test of All? Reflections on Fairness in Testing. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. My name is Tristan Bush and I'm with Caveon Test Security, and I'll be introducing the session today and would like to welcome you all. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes, and while we wait, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. Please know that this session is being recorded, and we will be sending out a copy of the slides and recording after the broadcast. Usually takes us a couple days to get everything put together. Everyone is on mute for the session, so if you do have questions, please put them in the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, and we will address them at the end. Answers to any questions that we don't get to, as well as the ones that we do get to, will be included in the follow-up email. I also wanted to let you know about the conference on test security coming up October 10th through 12th in Park City, Utah. The call for posters is open, and we also have sponsorship opportunities still available. This is the most important conference each year around the topic of test security, and we hope to see all of you there in some capacity. If you would like to engage with us online, there are several places to do so. You can follow us on Twitter at Caveon or at Test Security Guy. That's Dr. Freemer's Twitter handle. There are also several test security groups that you can join on LinkedIn. You can watch our company page, become a member of the Caveon Test Security group or the CESP certification group, and you can also like us on Facebook. I am very pleased to introduce our speakers for today's session, my Caveon colleagues, Dr. David Foster and Dr. Sarah Totin. Dr. Foster is Caveon's CEO and chairperson of the board. He has created and implemented a number of innovations during his career in the testing industry, including the first large-scale global use of computerized adaptive testing, the effective use of simulations in tests, and discrete option multiple choice, for which he owns the US patent, and also the introduction of online proctoring. After 34 years in the testing industry, Dr. Foster shows no evidence of slowing down and no doubt has a few more contributions to make. Also presenting is Dr. Sarah Totin. She's a psychometrician and data forensics scientist at Caveon, where she conducts analysis for testing organizations. She received a PhD in quantitative psychology from the University of Virginia and an MA in psychology from Wake Forest University. Her current research focuses on identifying predictors of item compromise and examining pre-knowledge, particularly those that are based on item response time statistics. A winner of the Benjamin D. Wright Innovations in Measurement Award, she brings her strong background in item response theory to Caveon. With that, I am happy to turn it over to Dr. Foster to get us started today.
Thanks, Tristan. I appreciate the introduction, and I want to welcome everybody to this webinar on fairness. I'm going to start with just a little brief introduction to the topic of fairness. Should be for all of us. If you've been involved in testing at all, fairness is probably one of the most important concepts. Certainly, it's critical for the validity of our exams, the use of our test scores. The standard, from the standards produced by the American Psychological Association, the American Educational Research Association, and the National Council on Measurement in Education, had a whole chapter in their 2014 revision of the standards. I've reprinted standard 3.1 here, and I'll read it as you see it. Those responsible for test development, revision, and administration should design all steps of the testing process to promote valid score interpretations for intended score uses for the widest possible range of individuals and relevant subgroups in the intended population. So which groups of individuals and subgroups is this referring to within the topic of fairness? Who must we protect with our policies and procedures? I've listed three here. Those with physical, mental, emotional, social, or other type of disability. These are people that have difficulty taking a normal exam with typical formats, and they need some sort of accommodation. The second one is those with poor test-taking skills or unfamiliarity with testing. Given the large number of immigrants today, those may be in our schools taking tests that are difficult for them for many reasons. The third are those that take tests honestly, who do not cheat. And we need to make sure that their scores are protected. There are two types of unfairness. One is where the test itself puts up barriers to individuals. So individuals with disabilities, it negatively impacts their scores. It's got unusual test formats, new test formats, or test administration procedures that don't allow them to demonstrate their skills. Is this fair? Let me give you some examples. You could probably think of others. Reading skills may impact performance on test questions, where reading is not the skill being measured. So if a mathematics question, word problem question has a lot of text, a lot of reading, and a person does not read well, they may not be able to demonstrate their mathematical skills. The second one has to do more with physical disabilities. Perhaps individuals need to go to a test center, but test centers are far away. They may not have the accommodations necessary for people with certain physical disabilities. Here's one having to do with the test design. Sight-impaired individuals are not able to read the text very well, if at all, on the screen that presents the test question. If there's no text-to-speech conversion where they can hear the words, then the test is not fair for them. These are three of dozens or hundreds of possible problems that will impact the fairness of a test. Remember, these are type 1. These are barriers that make it difficult to demonstrate competency, and they provide disadvantage for a large number of individuals. We can design, look at the bottom line of this screen, it is possible to design tests and testing environments to eliminate the source of unfairness. The second type of unfairness we've titled loopholes. This does not disadvantage the typical test taker. What it does, it provides unfair advantages to other test takers so that their scores are higher, but not because they're better at the competency. In fact, they may even be worse at the construct being measured, but they still receive higher scores. And I'll give you some examples in a second, but because of this, when opportunities are allocated based on test scores, some test takers with equal or better capability are unfairly left behind. So here's some examples. There are two of them here. Those who don't cheat on a college admissions test get lower comparative scores and are not allowed to attend their preferred colleges. The slots at those colleges are taken up by those who have been able to cheat. The second one is those with better test-taking skills, that's familiar with the testing format, the multiple choice questions that have taken them all their lives, they get higher scores. Those higher scores afford them employment opportunities, access to schools, and other opportunities denied to those that don't have those particular skills at taking tests. Again, we can fix this. This is technology today can be brought to bear to design tests and the testing environments to eliminate this type 2 source of unfairness. With that brief introduction to unfairness, you can see that it's more than just a single type or it's a simple way of looking at the unfairness in testing. And what we have for the rest of our session now is to discuss the concept of unfairness from 3 different perspectives. Those that take tests, those that create tests, the test developers, and those that use the test scores. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Totin, to cover the test takers and the test developers.
Thank you. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that we are all test takers. Test takers are a hugely variable population. It can be students, whether K through 12, college students or graduate school students, professionals who are trying to obtain certifications for careers. So it's a huge variety in who test takers are. And unfairness introduces undeserved advantages or disadvantages for some test takers. Not for all test takers, because that would just simply shift the distribution up or down, but for some test takers. And unfairness, as Dave talked about, can be because of your demographic group, because of cheating, or because of test taking skills or other construct irrelevant variance sources. On high stakes tests, the consequences of unfairness are substantial for test takers. So often, educations and careers of people depend on test results. As Dave said, honest examinees look relatively less qualified than cheaters. Also, the last 2 points here, I think, are some that go unnoticed most of the time. So if cheating is suspected or detected, honest test takers may suffer even more. Their test scores may be held. Their school, their test site may come under investigation, and therefore their tests are suspect. So they actually may suffer more if the cheating goes detected, as opposed to when the cheating is undetected. Also, those who do successfully cheat set themselves up for failure, because once you've cheated your way into a program or into a job, you now have to maintain that standard of performance. So you've set yourself up to require cheating in the future or to actually deserve that job or position, which is kind of an unfair position to put yourself in. So a few of the things we can do to cut down on unfairness are to ensure that demographic groups understand the items in a similar way. We can use think aloud protocols where examinees describe what they think about the item as they go through it and how they reach their answer. Some psychometric item analyses, just to make sure that items are performing similarly for demographic groups. Make it impossible or unrewarding to steal items. So smart items are one way to do this because there's a large range of stems and a large range of item options that can be selected. So even if an examinee steals the item, they may only steal one version of an item that has 100 versions, or maybe even more. Item clones work by making people who have stolen the items get the answer incorrect because the clones look like the original items that were stolen, but they have different answers. And watermarking is something that allows a series of numbers or an image to be embedded in the item as it's administered, and will make tracking down who stole an item very easy if that item was posted on the internet. Another thing that's important is preventing proxy test takers. Biometrics can help with this using fingerprints. I think there are some technologies that map arteries or veins in the hands. Iris scanning, these kinds of things ensure that the test taker is who they say they are and don't allow other people to test for them. Make test wiseness and constructive relevance variance obsolete. You can use smart items or DONC items to help ensure that. Unfairness also impacts test developers. I asked my colleague Kelly Foster what a profile with test developers would look like. And she said that test developers are people who can't sleep at night because they're worried about the exams that they create. Test developers are meticulously following steps to create high quality exams with scores that are meaningful. So when unfairness impacts test takers, it impacts test developers because the validity of test scores is now in question and the testing programs suffer. The effects are particularly strong if a program is seen as failing to prevent unfairness, especially if cheating is detected. A few of the impacts that unfairness have on testing programs is that the reputation of the program suffers. It's really difficult to recover a good reputation once unfairness is identified or suspected. An unfair test can also cause business to be lost to competing test programs. If your test has a reputation for being unfair, why will people pay to take that test? Why will employers rely on the results of that test? They won't. Unfairness takes substantial resources to address. When items are stolen, intellectual property is lost and legal action may be necessary. Refurbishing or replacing items is expensive and time-consuming, and additional analyses to uncover the source of unfairness can increase costs. It's very expensive and very time-consuming to address unfairness. Also, as a test developer, it's demoralizing to pour your time and money into creating really high-quality exams just to have them stolen, or just to have your test accused of being unfair. So what you want to do is do all that you can to identify and address potential sources of unfairness, just like some of the recommendations we had for test takers. Those were good ideas for test developers to do. Also, prevent item theft and cheating. You can use smart items, DOMC items, clones, or watermarking. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dave.
Thanks, Sarah. Tests are built so the test scores are produced and can be used. Stakeholders use tests. They're also called test users, and they could include the test taker himself or herself, such as students, employees, certification candidates, etc. Universities, teachers, instructors, professors create exams where they can judge the competencies of the students and provide grades. Corporations use tests to hire people. Governing bodies, such as medical licensing programs to provide the opportunity to practice for medical doctors who pass the exams. Certification programs, test developers, as Sarah had mentioned, and even the general public. Scores are used by these stakeholders for many reasons, and I mentioned a few of them. Admissions to college, hiring, promotion across grades, graduation, and much more. The whole purpose of testing is to produce test scores that are representative of each person's ability, competency in that domain. And fairness is so important to make sure that test score is meaningful. Stakeholders rely on the accuracy of scores. They assume they're all accurate unless they hear something like there's been a cheating scandal, or they find out someone who passed the test does not really have the ability they should have. The accuracy of scores depends on scores being produced fairly. That is, all examinees are treated equally. No one is unfairly disadvantaged or advantaged. I think that's clear from our presentation today. If fairness is neglected, any part of it, whether it has to do with cheating and some people having access to questions and answers, or the ability to take the test, or the ability to demonstrate what you know despite a disability, if those types of fairness are neglected, test scores can't be trusted. It's that simple. It can't be used then, and therefore all the purposes that we described will be frustrated. In conclusion today, I'll talk about a couple of ways that you can address these problems or unfairness. There are many critics and criticisms of testing. You can look in newspapers or a quick Google search and you'll find blogs, media reports, scientific papers listing these criticisms. And unfortunately, many of the criticisms regarding unfairness are accurate. There is truly a great deal of unfairness occurring in high stakes and medium stakes exams today. Some of the reasons are the designs of questions and tests are outdated. They're decades or even a century old. They support test wiseness rather than try to remove it. And they allow fraud rather than try to eliminate it. Using traditional multiple choice tests contributes to unfairness by allowing some students, either through test wiseness or having access to pre-knowledge of the test, obtain higher scores. Test fraud continues to increase. Some high-stakes testing programs address cheating and theft better than others. Allowing fraud to continue goes against the testing standards, and I quoted one of them at the beginning of the session. And there's new technology that can prevent it. There's no reason to allow these sources of unfairness to continue. So Caveon has a couple of suggestions. We've used technology and our experience in the security area to introduce a couple of technologies recently. These would change the design of your exams, including your items and your test administration procedures, to reduce, and in some cases, even eliminate unfairness. Deliberate steps to design the items and tests, to remove the disadvantages and some advantages that other people have. So the solutions we are offering and have for some years now, to replace your traditional multiple choice item format with a more effective selected response format, which we call the discrete option multiple choice. A Google search, you can find out quite a bit about it. You're also welcome to contact Caveon for a better description. In this past February, we introduced Caveon Smart Items. These are methods and technology to eliminate test theft, along with most cheating methods. This is a technology, and just very briefly, what a Caveon Smart Item does is it presents many variations of an item so that people cannot predict what exact part of the skill they will be asked to demonstrate. They'll need to be prepared in all of them, and any pre-knowledge of what someone else saw will not be effective. And therefore, it takes away the advantage of the cheaters. Again, we're not going to obviously go into depth on those. So to learn more about these technologies, please contact us. Okay, Tristan, that completes our session today. Are there any questions we can answer?
Yes, we've actually had several questions come through. So let's start with the first one here. Is unfairness that big of a deal? What percentage of test takers does that really affect?
Well, my first answer is always, it doesn't really matter if it's just one person. We don't want to make our tests unfair for anyone, even a single individual. But the better answer is that affects quite a bit, quite a large number, in fact, especially the area of cheating when tests are exposed. And we've seen results from our data forensic analyses at Caveon where a majority of the test takers had access to pre-knowledge about the test questions, were able to do very well, and the minority of test takers without that had much lower scores, and by comparison looked like they really didn't have the skills, when in actuality they probably had higher skills. So it could be as a small percentage, 1, 10%, or it could be very high depending on how lax test security is in a particular program. So we've seen the full range.
Great, thanks, Dave. The next question, it seems like this presentation is all about test security. What does test security have to do with fairness?
Well, test security is about protecting the validity of scores. And unfairness is a threat to test security because it threatens the validity of test scores. So unfairness is very related to test security, because if you don't have test security, you don't have validity. And if you don't have unfairness, you don't have validity. And what our main focus is test validity. So we want to protect our scores from becoming invalid by promoting fairness and making sure that test security is up to a high standard.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, one more. Isn't it a good thing to have test taking skills? Isn't it an important life skill nowadays?
It's an important life skill nowadays, but only because of how we test examinees so often. So it's not necessarily a life skill. It is a skill that makes you score better on tests in the current world. But in an ideal world, nobody would get an advantage just because they're better at taking tests and not better at the underlying construct. If we're measuring intelligence, is it fair to look smarter than someone else because you take tests better? No. And so what we want to do is we want people to have the same opportunity to succeed, regardless of their test taking skills.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, we'll answer one more question before we wrap up for the day. This last question is, what is a SMART item and how is it different from other items?
Okay, that is a good question. I am not sure I'm going to be able to do it justice at this point. It takes a bit of explanation, but essentially, a SMART item is one that changes every time it's presented to a test taker. You're all used to the idea that a test item or a test question is static. It's fixed. It never changes. A SMART item, however, is 180 degrees opposite. It changes every time. And in addition, it covers the entire skill that it's intended to cover. Instead, as opposed to the traditional item that just measures a small slice of that skill. It changes the way tests are built, and therefore it changes the way people take tests, how they prepare for tests, how people teach them, the concepts and the skills they need. So it's a very important one, and the biggest advantage relative to this session today is that it reduces most of these sources of unfairness. Now, again, that tells you about why the SMART item exists, but probably not much about exactly what it is. And certainly, I'm happy to provide you some presentations we've given and other information if you contact us and request that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That wraps up our presentation for today. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next presentation. So be on the lookout for our announcement on when our next upcoming webinar will be.